You are listening to Canadian Gothic.
Hello, listeners. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this episode contains discussion of sexual assault allegations. Some of the details we reference get quite graphic and may be disturbing to some listeners. Tonight's episode is going to focus on one of the most consequential scandals in Canadian sports history. It involves both members of Canada's gold medal-winning 2018 World Junior Hockey Team, as well as the sport's governing body, Hockey Canada. The scandal centers around an incident that occurred in London, Ontario during what was supposed to be a weekend to celebrate the gold medal win. After a Hockey Canada gala, the 18 to 20-year-old players fanned out between several bars and nightclubs in downtown London. When the dust settled, a young woman, who due to a publication ban we'll refer to as EM, alleges that what started as a consensual act between her and one of the players led to her being sexually assaulted by multiple players in a hotel room. But this scandal is even more complicated than allegations of a sex assault committed by a group of men who, by the time the allegations really went public, were playing in the NHL. This is also a scandal that involves some questionable police work and what to many seems like Hockey Canada's attempt to cover this and any similar cases up. To help us walk through this complex and sensitive story, I'm joined by Kristi Lee, the host of the Canadian True Crime podcast, who recently released an in-depth investigative series that examines the case. Together, we're going to carefully and respectfully lay out what we know about the allegations, how they were investigated, and how, over time, the case has evolved to have such a profound impact on Canadian hockey and public trust. So let's get into it. Tonight, on this episode of the Canadian Gothic, our story is the Hockey Canada sex assault scandal.
The 5 former Hockey Canada teammates admit to having sex with the alleged victim, known as EM. The question being weighed by the judge, did she consent?
The high-profile nature of the case, I do think, has really sparked this broader conversation about consent.
At this bar in 2018, EM met one of the accused, Michael McLeod. They drank alcohol, danced together, and went back to this hotel for consensual sex. Afterwards, McLeod sent this message to a group chat inviting others to join. The others arrived and engaged in sexual acts, which EM said were not consensual. But McLeod told police she was asking for it. Canadian law states consent must be active, ongoing, and communicated. This defense lawyer says the court of public opinion is holding the players to an impossible standard.
There has been a strong move to redefine what consent is legally. And there's a lot of political and societal pressure to allow somebody to essentially change their view of consent after the fact.
Just to set the scene and I guess give the context for what we're going to talk about, tell me what you've learned about the social position a professional or an up-and-coming hockey player would have here in Canada.
Well, all countries have their sporting heroes, and I might come from a country where hockey is not a big deal, or at least ice hockey isn't. But I'm familiar with the way that sporting heroes are kind of treated, and obviously here in Canada, it's very specific to hockey, and they occupy like a privileged cultural position in our society, and especially when we're talking about a team of under 20s, this kind of junior hockey league that they have. These players are like, they've been playing hockey since they were little. Their parents have outlaid a lot of money. They've been, told that they're gods, basically. They're sporting gods, since they were small. And then once they get to 16, they have to, they join these kind of junior hockey teams, and they go out and stay with billet families and in small towns that are focused on the local hockey team, and they get into this culture where everybody's worshiping them and they're known as gods and they can do no wrong, and it ends up where they don't have the same set of rules as what normal people do. So it creates an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, in reading about this case and listening to your series on it, to me they kind of come across almost like the life of a rock star. It's like this privileged kind of traveling around, the camaraderie between them, the way they stick together, and in some cases are protected, as we will hear. But let's get a bit deeper into it. What we're going to be talking about here is a scandal that involves Canada's 2018 World Junior team. So tell me a bit about who the 2018 World Junior team is. What makes this team special? What did they have going on in 2018 that puts them in this position to basically rock the structure of hockey in Canada?
Well, it's funny that you asked this because I actually didn't go into this much at all in my series. So I had to research it for this chat because I'm like, what is this World Junior Championship anyway? Because I just kept saying they were in town for the World Junior, So I had to look it up.
So you did, like, how many hours long is your series?
Oh, like 7 hours.
And you managed to skip over the part about what the tournament they were playing.
Yeah, well, I knew that they had won the championship, and then this was like a series of events to celebrate months later. But okay. I'm like, so I didn't realize, I thought it was a national championship, but it's actually an international championship where each country has a best team of under 20s and they all compete against each other once a year at this like World Junior Championship tournament. And so the Canadian team is actually the most successful in the world in this World Junior thing. Most years, since the thing has been started in the 70s, most years they've won medals, first, second, or third. And it's apparently a record-breaking, they've won gold at 20 of them. So this team, I imagine there's a lot of pressure put on them, when these players are selected to be in this team each year. And they already have a lot of pressure, right? Because, they've been part of that whole cog machine of junior hockey that kind of churns out future NHL players.
And in a big way, I think this, of course, is a tournament for under 20s across the world to compete, but also in a big way, it's almost like a tryout for the big leagues, because a lot of these under 20s, when they're done with this tournament, is their chance to go into the NHL and get recruited and scouted and all that. So they're getting it from every angle. But
yeah, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And so this year, 2018, they won gold. So they made it all the way to the finals and they won against Sweden 3-1. And so they did a very good job. That was in January of 2018. And then in June of 2018, Hockey Canada decides to stage a weekend of events to celebrate their World Championship win. So all of the junior players come to London, Ontario, and for this kind of weekend of formal and informal events.
And it's within this weekend in London, Ontario, that the incident takes place that leads to the scandal that in a big way takes down Hockey Canada. So why don't we start with this? What are EM's allegations of what happened?
Yeah, so like I said, these hockey players are in town. That day they had a ring ceremony where each player received their championship ring. And then that night they had a gala dinner where they're, showing up in suits. There's alcohol there. They all say that they were drinking. And then after the gala dinner, they got changed and they decided to go out on the town to blow off some steam. So a bunch of them arrived at this certain bar called Jack's Bar in London, Ontario at around 11:30 p.m. that night. And that is where EM met those hockey players, specifically Michael McLeod, who is, I guess you could call him the ringleader of this whole thing.
We've referred to it as an under 20 team. So these guys that EM runs into at the bar, 19, 20-year-olds would be about right?
18 to 20. In fact, one of them, Alex Formenton, was only 18, so he wasn't allowed in. He couldn't get into Jack's Bar, so he had to go to a different bar where a bunch of coaches and stuff were.
Wow.
So I know if that tells you. And then, at Jack's Bar, there was Michael McLeod and Dylan Dubé, Callan Foote, Brett Howden, and Carter Hart. And then at some point, Carter Hart left to go to the other bar to join Alex Formenton.
Okay.
So towards the end of the night, still at the bar is Michael McLeod and EM and some other players. And EM and Michael McLeod had been dancing, drinking, and flirting, and they decide to go back to his hotel room to have sex. And so this is fully consensual. EM agrees to it. They leave together at about 1:30 in the morning in an Uber. And so they leave the other players at the bar and they go straight to the hotel, the Delta Hotel, where all of the team is playing. And they've all got kind of roommates. So in Michael McLeod's room, Alex Formenton is also sharing, but he's at the other bar, right? Because he wasn't allowed into Jack's. So what actually happens is EM and Michael McLeod arrive at the Delta Hotel at about 1:50. They have consensual sex, and then EM goes to have a shower. And when she gets out of the shower, she walks out of the bathroom naked, and she's surprised to see that Michael McLeod is dressed and he's doing something on his phone. And she's like, well, this is weird. And we'll get to what he was doing on his phone later.
Okay.
But shortly after that, his teammates started entering the hotel room. And EM is surprised to see them, right? She says she didn't know that they were coming, and she didn't consent to them coming either. And she's naked. So she goes back to the bathroom, still naked, and she waits around for a little bit. And then when she comes out, more players have entered the hotel room. And she's like, what is going on? And we're going to get into a little bit of kind of graphic detail here, but EM says that they told her to lie on the floor and start touching herself. And originally she refused. She said that, it's a hotel room floor. It's dirty. And she said at trial that this was her way of kind of deflecting in a polite way, but they didn't take no for an answer. So one of them, and it's never been established who, grabbed a bed sheet and put it onto the floor in between the two beds in the hotel room. And it's like, well, I've solved your problem. Get on the floor and start touching yourself. It was a chaotic environment. These hockey players, they were amped up, they were drunk, and they were kind of crowded around her, above her, talking loudly and joking with each other. They were telling each other what to do and telling her what they wanted to see her do. And she remembered them putting penises in her face. She was being told to suck it and spit on it. She said that she felt intimidated and fearful and pressured to comply with what they wanted because she didn't feel safe not to. And the big thing about this is that her version of events, and this made a lot of headlines, her version of events is patchy and inconsistent. Her memory blurs everything together as kind of one continuous thing with flashes of memory here and there, and it's not like a linear event with separate sexual acts.
Yeah, because this is late at night, they're drinking, and it's a traumatic incident, according to her. So all this stuff together, all those factors together would make this a hard story to tell in any kind of straight way. And it's also a bunch of people she doesn't know as well. So it makes it that much harder.
Exactly. So much so that she didn't know who was who. She couldn't identify any of them. And the only reason why they got identified later in order to charge them was because they kind of identified themselves. So, yeah.
So this all happens in the hotel, and I'm assuming this goes on for quite some time before she gets out of there.
Yeah, so the incident took place over 2 hours so the first players arrived at just after 2:30 and then they were gone by 4:30 in the morning. Wow. So yeah, everyone's tired, drunk. It's not a good situation. EM, despite all of her, memory gaps and inconsistencies and patches, she kind of paints a very vivid story of a woman who felt vulnerable and intimidated and outnumbered by, elite athletes, like I said, who were amped up after celebrating a big win. And she says that her instincts, she doesn't know why she acted the way that she did, but it's like her instincts told her that the only way she was going to get out of the situation safely was to give them what they clearly wanted, what they were telling her that they wanted, which to her seemed to be a scene from a porn. So she agreed that she effectively adopted a porn star persona to kind of get through it. And she couldn't understand why she did that. There are some explanations which you've alluded to, which we'll get to in a second. But so they're telling her what they want her to do. So Carter Hart received oral sex. Alex Formenton received oral and vaginal sex in the bathroom. And then Dylan Dubé, who was actually the captain of the junior championship team, he received oral sex. And again, EM couldn't recall every detail of how it started or who they were or what order it went in. At some points, there were up to 10 hockey players in the hotel room, all aged 18 to 20. And she found herself kind of on autopilot, performing the sex acts on multiple players while others watched. And she said at one point, they slapped her on her buttocks really hard without her consent, and it hurt. She said that some of the players were joking and wondering out loud if they could put a golf ball inside her or even a whole golf club inside her. And because there was a golf tournament the next day and there were golf clubs and balls inside the hotel room.
Oh, my God.
She said that, she cried a couple of times, and this was corroborated by multiple players. So you would think that over a 2-hour group sex experience, if someone's crying several times during that experience, it's a red flag that it's a red flag.
Maybe a good time to check in that everyone's comfortable.
Exactly.
How does she get out of there? Like, this goes on for several hours, like you said. How does she end up out of the hotel? Do you know what leads to her leaving? And how does this get on a police officer's desk as a report of a sexual assault?
Right. So she basically kind of hangs around until she feels that she's okay to leave. And at some points, she's like waiting around. She had sex with Michael McLeod again, oral sex and vaginal sex without consent, because she felt like that's what he wanted and that's what she had to do to leave. And then eventually she left. And, this is after 2 so-called consent videos had been filmed, where she says, one's 6 minutes long, one's 12 minutes long. She says, yes, I consent. Like, it's just.
Wait, back up. What is this video? Videos?
Yeah. So Michael McLeod, apparently it's a big thing with athletes. And this is what Carter Hart testified to at trial, that they've been told that you have to record a woman giving her consent. So it's like they don't understand enough about women to know if they're consenting or not. So they have to actually get them to say, yes, I am consenting on camera. And that is what he showed the police officer as proof that she consented.
Okay. I had no idea that was a thing or that it was involved in this case.
Yeah.
But that must be damaging when it comes time to make those allegations if you have those videos. But I'm guessing, I'm imagining it comes across as like a sexualized version of like those hostage videos you see from the other side of the world. But
yeah,
so there was 2 separate videos of her giving consent to this.
Yeah.
Of course, she's intoxicated and she's probably a little out of it in the videos, but they're still there. And that's certainly going to be a challenge when push comes to shove.
Well, here's the thing, right? Canadian law is very specific about what constitutes consent. And there is no such thing as advance or retroactive consent, and it can be withdrawn at any time. So a consent video doesn't prove anything. according to the law, real consent is enthusiastic, ongoing, specific, and freely given. It doesn't cover another act or person. Everybody needs to have their own clear, enthusiastic, verbal yes for every act. And that often means, like you said, checking in. Are you sure you want this? What about now? Are you okay with someone else joining? None of that happened in this instance. And so basically, EM is saying, I didn't know these hockey players were going to show up. Once they're all there and they're telling me what they want me to do, I feel like I have to do that or else something bad is going to happen. None of them actually said, are you okay? Are you sure you want to do these sexual acts? It's like they go up and like flop it out and that's it. There's not a word spoken. It's really... they didn't prevent her from leaving, but she did try to leave a couple of times, and someone would come up to her, put their arm around her and say, come on, you're having fun. We're all having fun. And so she felt like I'm sure she could have fought her way out, but it's all well-established science called the neurobiology of trauma that, when you're faced with a threatening or traumatic situation, your body's trauma response, once it kicks in, it floods your brain with all these kind of stress chemicals to help you deal with a situation. But it's not there to help stop a sexual assault. It's there to help get you out of there safely. So, and often like the response is automatic and it defaults to like things that they've learned in childhood. So if you've been taught in childhood to be compliant and to appease, then that's often the behavior that ends up happening when your trauma defenses are enacted. So it's a whole thing. So she got out of there and she's crying on the way home. They don't even call her a cab or anything. She has to call her own Uber to get home, and she's crying in the shower at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and her mum hears her crying in the shower, and then she tells her mum what happened. And her mum's boyfriend knows somebody at Hockey Canada. So he calls his contact at Hockey Canada while her mum decides to contact the London police. And EM didn't know about any of this, right?
Okay.
It's either the following day or the next day EM decides to go to the police, and she tells them everything that I've just told you. She couldn't explain why she acted this way. And she said, it may have appeared that I was consenting, but I wasn't. I was doing what I felt I had to. Unfortunately, this police officer, who was, the lead detective on the case, once he spoke to the hockey players and Michael McLeod showed him those consent videos, his understanding of consent and the nuance of sexual assault, especially when it's involving this kind of scenario, where there's sports and a power imbalance and that type of thing, his understanding of consent was not where it needed to be. And so he took these consent videos as, well, she's clearly saying that she's consenting, so she must be consenting. He's not following the law. Because the law requires actual steps to check in with and make sure the consent is there and that it's continuous.
Okay. So the initial investigation that starts, the day after or in the days after, does that go anywhere further than interviewing EM, interviewing some of the hockey players, the cops seeing those videos? Does it go beyond that?
Yeah. So unfortunately, because the lead detective, and this all came out at trial, the lead detective formed an early conclusion that a sexual assault did not happen, but he still kind of had to interview the hockey players just to say that he's covered all of their bases. And so eventually the players kind of lawyered up soon after, and eventually he spoke to them several months later, but it was a tightly controlled interview at their lawyers' offices where and he asked them only kind of limited questions. And at trial, the Crown would argue that the detective showed little interest in determining what actually happened. He was just kind of going through the motions. Wow. The other thing too is that he said to Michael McLeod, how come all these other players arrived at at the hotel room? Like, why were they coming to the hotel room? And he said, I don't know. Like I had food. I ordered food. They must have just been coming for the food. And the detective took that as at face value. Another thing is that the London police never sought a court order for the team's text messages, right? So he did, yeah. So, and that is where the bulk of the evidence is that that confirms that Michael McLeod actually sent a 3-way invitation. So he sent a message to his group chat with all of his hockey player friends from that championship team, 19 hockey players. So when he was on his phone, this is what he was doing. He put in the group chat, who wants a 3-way, get to room 209 quick. And so all of these players, some of them are at Jack's bar, some of them are at this other place, some of them are already back at the hotel. They're checking their messages, and straight away Carter Hart and Alex Formenton leave. They get a cab and come over to the hotel, and then Brett Howden and others arrive soon after that. So they're hightailing it. They get this invitation,
Wow.
and they're hightailing it over to the hotel room. This is the first round of investigation, and the detective does not know this at the time, right? So all he knows is that Michael McLeod said that there's food in the hotel room, and that's why these guys must be showing up.
And the investigator kind of is like, okay, good enough for me.
Exactly.
You got the consent videos. There's food there. That makes sense. And that's kind of like the end of the investigation for the most part initially.
Yeah, pretty much. So based on all of this, the London police closed the investigation without charging anyone. And at the same time, Hockey Canada had been conducting their own investigation based on EM's mother's boyfriend's contact. So when the police closed their investigation, Hockey Canada also closed their investigation, and that really upset EM.
As we get back into the conversation, we're going to pick up shortly after September of 2020. The police and the Hockey Canada investigation just ended, but as Kristi said, EM isn't happy about how things were handled up to this point. And her next move is going to change Hockey Canada and inform the way the courts and the public view consent. 2 years after the first round of investigations, EM files a major lawsuit against Hockey Canada and the players involved in the incident. We're going to jump back into the discussion and hear about the scandal that stirs up as a result.
So she decided to file a lawsuit for $3.55 million with Hockey Canada for failing to investigate the complaint properly. And the organisation quickly settled within a month. We don't know how much they paid her to settle it, but it wasn't anywhere near $3.55 million, as a lot of people like to say.
And sorry to interrupt you, but one interesting part of this is this civil suit in the settlement. At the time, like, this wasn't big news. Like, it's not like everybody knew about this lawsuit and this settlement. Like, this kind of was pretty hush-hush for the most part.
Oh, it was very hush-hush because, and we'll get to that in a second, but this is why nobody found out intentionally. It was intentionally covered up so that no one would find out. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how they found out, but TSN found out and reported that Hockey Canada had settled EM's lawsuit very quickly. But it wasn't just that; it's that they did it without even telling the accused hockey players that there had even been a complaint. Mm-hmm. So that I don't think that's very fair.
No, I feel like what we're about to describe is like an actual cover-up that got discovered. Like, it seems like what it was an attempt to just throw money at EM and bury these allegations so these hockey players could grow up and become stars and Hockey Canada would keep its image. But it all blows up in their face because how they paid the settlement and where the money came from just makes this whole thing look worse. So it is an out-of-court settlement. So this lawsuit doesn't go to court. They settle with her. But when it eventually is exposed by the media where the money came from, how does that happen? And what is, you tell the story of where this money comes from.
Yeah, so a Globe and Mail report revealed that the payout came from a secret fund called the National Equity Fund that had been built from player registration fees. So they were siphoning player registration fees to fund this National Equity Fund, the secret fund.
The most generic name, by the way, the National Equity Fund. It would sound like it's some kind of investment, but what is it for then?
So that fund had settled 9 other cases related to sexual assault and abuse claims with Hockey Canada since 1989, and they'd paid out more than $7.5 million total. So it's, obviously when all of this was reported and the public learned that Hockey Canada had apparently set up a process that prioritized their players staying on the ice over transparency, accountability, or any kind of justice, like the case just exploded into national scandal. And the fact that they were paying it out, like using the hockey players' own registration fees. So it's almost like they anticipated that these things would happen and set up the fund and a way to fund it just to deal with it on the down low.
Yeah, it just I can't get past the name again because to me it seems like they're hiding it. If you saw a collection of like bank accounts and funds and stuff that Hockey Canada had, if there was one called National Equity Fund, you would just scroll right past it. Like it's just some random, insurance thing or whatever or investment. But maybe it is an insurance thing, and it's kind of insurance against allegations of sexual impropriety, and it seems like that the evidence would show that's largely how that money was used. And when this comes out, it's this that takes this case from a group sex assault to like a national scandal involving the cover-up of a group sex assault. Right. And it just blows up into this big kind of thing. And so the public outcry kind of resulted in the London police deciding to take another look at the file and figure out like what happened in the first investigation. Why would they decide that there's no grounds to lay charges, yet Hockey Canada preemptively settled this lawsuit and with a history? Yeah, because when it comes out that this settlement was made, where the money came from, it's big news. So now there's pressure on the London police. Like, why did you allow it to get to this point? So they're facing pressure now to like, we'll have a reinvestigation. Hockey Canada thinks paying this money is going to settle it all, but quite the opposite. It is what lit the fire underneath the second investigation, which will have a much different result. Right. And that's, one of the big misconceptions in this case is that, the London police got it right the first time and they only opened the investigation because of the public pressure. There was nothing more to be found. But that's not true. There were so many flaws in the initial investigation, like I said. So once they reopened it and decided to get court orders to access all those text messages and Instagram messages and group chats and other digital evidence, they realized, things are a little different than what the hockey players were saying. I know in your series, you go deep into the trials and the evidence. So maybe without giving us the Canadian True Crime Podcast 5-episode version, what is the main evidence that they find that leads them to press charges this time around? So it's obviously, the 3-way invitation. So Michael McLeod sent to the team the group chat about 20 minutes after he and Em had consensual sex. Like he didn't waste any time. And, he invites them all to come to his hotel room for a 3-way. Now, Em has always been consistent in saying she never once said that she was interested in having sex with other hockey players, nor did she consent to them being invited to the room. So it's only 3 years later that Michael McLeod started saying that, this is after the text message stuff came out, he started saying, well, she told me she wanted me to invite them. So first he's saying they came for the food.
I don't know why they came. It was for the food. Then the text message comes out that proves that he invited them for a three-way. And then Michael McLeod changes his story and says, well, she told me to invite them.
Okay. But either way, it's still like it ends up being her word against his/theirs. And then you have at the center of that this video or videos of consent. So I can only imagine, like I see the scene that's being set for an eventual trial. So the hockey player's defense is going to be that she took part in it and she wanted this and she was giving consent throughout it. And her version is the opposite to that.
The hockey players are basically saying that, like I said, Michael McLeod said he didn't know why they were coming to his room. The other players all said that they came for the food as well. So, they all kind of backed him up. And instead, they found this woman lying naked on a bed sheet on the floor, like touching herself and offering them all sexual favors. And they're saying, oh, we feel really weird and awkward about this. And, some of them have girlfriends and others would like to participate in whatever she is offering, but they don't want to have sex in front of the other guys. And then they're all saying EM starts begging them for sex and taunting them when they won't do it for these reasons that I've just mentioned. I don't want to do it in front of other people. Some of them decide to take her up on her alleged offers. EM says that she didn't offer them anything. She did the same thing with those videos as she was doing the whole night, which is doing what she thought they wanted her to do. So by the time of the trial kind of happened 7 years later, the big defense was that EM asked McLeod to invite his teammates to the hotel room because she was up for a wild night. Okay. And so that was the thing. She's basically, they're calling her, a puck bunny who's desperate to sleep with a bunch of hockey players at, 2:30 in the morning after a big night out and drinks and stuff. It's just crazy. Like, why would anyone want to sleep with a whole hockey team?
Sounds like a lot of work.
It really does.
When this second investigation happens and all this new evidence comes out, how many people are actually charged in this? Yeah,
so there's 5 guys charged, 5 men charged. The number one is Michael McLeod, the ringleader of the whole thing. The one,
and he is the one who actually meets her at the bar,
yes,
brings her home, and gets the whole thing in motion. And like you said earlier, she gets out of the shower and sees him texting,
yes,
which is which seems to set the whole thing in motion.
Exactly, yeah. And she didn't know why he was texting, but now they know.
What was he charged with?
He is charged with sexual assault for allegedly obtaining oral sex and then vaginal sex from EM without her consent. That's later on. That's not the initial. Yep.
Okay.
And he was also charged with being a party to the offense, which means that he knowingly did or said something that could encourage somebody to come to the room for the purpose of a sexual assault. So there's several different elements that have to be proven there, right? So you could prove that that he did something to encourage people to come to the room, but whether or not his intent was to commit a sexual assault, that's the other part of the intent is a hard one, right? Because it kind of speaks to if they had sincere belief that she really was consenting, or if they knew she was not consenting and continued to do it. So that is kind of, for many people, the crux of the issue. For the judge at this trial, it was not. But yeah, so that's Michael McLeod. By the time he was charged, he was playing with the New Jersey Devils.
Oh, geez. So in the NHL, a professional hockey player. Because, I guess it's the passage of like 4 years or whatever. So
they were charged at the beginning of 2024. So it was 6 years.
Wow. This must have haunted him, because it's, of course, when you're done your, the World Juniors, that you're right on the cusp of going pro. So he made it. What about So he was on the New Jersey Devils, the NHL team, when he was charged and when this trial happens.
Yep.
What about the others?
So Alex Formenton, who is the one who was too young to get into Jack's bar. So by this point, he is playing with the Ottawa Senators.
Okay.
And he's also charged with sexual assault for obtaining oral sex and vaginal sex from EM in the bathroom without her consent, allegedly. And then Carter Hart, who was then the goalie for the Philadelphia Flyers, was also charged in relation to oral sex. And then Dylan Dubé, who at that time was with the Calgary Flames. These guys are all with major NHL teams when they're charged.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Dubé was charged for two things, but one charge, it was the oral sex, and it was also for slapping EM on the buttocks without her consent. And then the fifth player charged was Kellen Foote, who was then of the New Jersey Devils, this is the weirdest one, for allegedly coming into the hotel room, doing the splits over EM's face. And she says that he had no pants on and he was grazing his genitals on her face without her consent. But at trial, Carter Hart testified that, he had pants on. But there is other evidence that wasn't admitted at trial. They told the Hockey Canada investigator that Kellen Foote did not have pants on. So there's conflicting evidence there. I tend to think on the balance of probabilities, he might have had no pants on.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually did it at the bar, at Jack's bar earlier too. There's video footage showing him doing the splits with his pants on. So I don't know why he'd want to go to the hotel room and then do that trick again, still with his pants on. It's not much of a trick if he's already done it. I guess if he's...
Yeah.
It's a whole thing.
The 5 accused arrived in court almost 7 years since an alleged sexual assault that has rocked the world of hockey.
We call this our national sport, and yet it's the one that's on trial right now.
In June 2018, Team Canada had just won the World Junior Championship. A Hockey Canada gala was held at this London, Ontario bar. Police say the alleged victim met one of the players, and the two went to this hotel for consensual sex. But the woman alleges 7 other players then showed up and engaged in sexual acts without her consent. Police investigated, but no charges were laid, and the case was closed. But in 2022, it was revealed that Hockey Canada had settled a lawsuit with the alleged victim out of court, using funds from youth hockey registration fees, sparking a public outcry.
Hockey Canada has completely lost the confidence of Canadians.
The federal government temporarily suspended Hockey Canada's funding, and police reopened their investigation.
My sincerest apology to the victim.
Allegations of sexual assault involving high-profile athletes rarely make it to criminal court.
A lot of the past has been, covered by non-disclosure agreements or covered up.
One of the reasons victim advocates say is that a trial can be grueling. The 5 defendants each have their own legal team, meaning the alleged victim could face 5 rounds of intense cross-examination.
Typically talk about sexual assault trials as being like a second rape. This is going to be like that. It's going to be deeply humiliating.
Legal experts say the case will likely hinge on the question of consent.
In the old days, that would be enough, right? But in this particular case, all of those players had their careers destroyed the day the allegation was made, and they were sacrificed at the altar of public opinion.
Jury selection is now complete, Nithu. Opening statements expected tomorrow.
What about this? These are all NHL players at the point that this trial is going to happen.
Yeah.
What happens to, are they still playing while this is happening?
No, they all took leave of absences from their respective teams, and then they all so they weren't playing with the NHL, but I know that Michael McLeod went and played for some Russian team until the trial. Until the trial happened, and I can't remember what the others were doing. I think Kellen Foote went back to a construction job or something like that. So they're all kind of doing these little things, not with the NHL. And then they all pleaded not guilty and opted for a jury trial, which they accused person can opt for a jury trial or a judge alone trial. That is their choice. But when you go for a judge alone trial, there's an optical situation. It looks like you're being a little bit less than transparent. Whereas if you opt to be tried by a jury of your peers, that's kind of giving an appearance of, I have nothing to hide. I want this to be open. So they could choose to go for a judge alone trial, but they chose a jury trial for assume the optics. Yeah. So that's where things were when it started.
Yeah. And anything that is described as like a national scandal isn't going to have an easy route through the courts. In this, the trial or trials or however we want to put it, it's its own story because this has many ups and downs. Give us the abridged version of the route this takes through the court system.
Yeah. So it was arguably the most complex sexual assault trial in Canadian history.
It would have to be, right?
Yeah.
You got like a group of powerful people who were young. You add alcohol, you add, the settlement, the early investigation, Hockey Canada seemingly like maybe trying to protect themselves and the players a little bit. I can't imagine a more complicated trial.
Well, also because other trials, the other kind of big ones in Canada have been the Jacob Hogard trial where there were 2 victims, but not together. And then there was the Jiango Meshi trial where there were several victims, but it was Jiango Meshi one-on-one with each victim. This trial, you've got 1 victim and 5 accused, all in the same room together, plus a whole bunch of witnesses. It's extremely complex. So what this means is that the victim complainant, EM, has to be cross-examined by 5 different defense teams, and they're all working together for the common goal, right? They all want those players acquitted. And so there's a few debacles that happen as a result of these defense teams, and it all kind of harks back to the judge versus jury trial thing that I was talking about before. So there was a mountain of evidence and information, multiple police statements, Hockey Canada interviews, hours of testimony, like wall-to-wall media coverage. On the first day of the trial, just after the Crown had delivered their opening address, there was a debacle related to how jury members perceived the behavior of certain defense lawyers. And the judge declared a mistrial because all the defense lawyers got together and said, hey, this isn't... So what actually happened is that... one of the defense lawyers went to the food court during the lunch break on the first day of trial and ran into one of the jurors and and I guess they're in the same line at like Timmy's or whatever. And the juror ended up complaining to the judge that the defense lawyer kind of said out loud, I heard a lot of nodding this morning, meaning during the Crown's opening address, meaning the juror felt like they were being accused of agreeing with the Crown already. This is what the juror told the judge. Of course, the defense lawyer said, no, that nothing. I didn't mean anything by it. Like nothing, I wasn't saying it to them. I was just saying it to my partner and they overheard, so that was a debacle. But what ended up happening was that the defense lawyers argued to the judge that because of this, it could taint how the jury perceived the defense. So therefore, it has to be a mistrial. You cannot use this jury. So the judge is like, fine, declare a mistrial, and then brought a second jury in. And this time, this jury lasted all the way until the end of EM's testimony and cross-examination. And this is another insane thing. She testified for 2 days and then faced a really brutal cross-examination that went for another 7 days. Can you imagine being cross-examined by 5 different defense teams, highly paid of, NHL players, and they're
Yeah, and every one of them trying to attack your credibility and build on what the last person did for
Exactly.
7 days. That's grueling.
Yeah, I don't know how she did it. Like, kudos to her. And you know, they're lining up to try and discredit her based on, you know, outdated rape myths about how a real or perfect victim would behave and what they would do and look like and stuff.
Yeah, but it shows kind of the benefit of like a publication ban, because could you imagine what would have happened if her information had been out publicly, how they would have attacked her and in the press and you know, all that. Like I think she's very fortunate that the publication ban protects her, and that publication bans protect victims in cases like this, because it's, you know, there are powerful people who will want to make you look bad and discredit you.
Yeah, 100%. And I can't imagine. I mean, she was doxxed at one point. I read, you know, a bunch of hockey fans got together and doxxed her, figured out who she was, because, you know, it's London. It's not like it's Toronto or LA or something.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And this was high profile, but that's why I'm so glad to get this story from you, because as it was all going on, there was just so much to it. I couldn't keep up. So it's like, I know the basics of the story, but it wasn't until I listened to your series that I saw the depth of how bad it actually was and how complicated it actually was. But let's keep going. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay. So EM, awful cross-examination for 2 days. So after EM's cross-examination had finished, there was another jury debacle. And this time, so we've got a second jury now. One of the new jurors wrote a note to the judge with a complaint. As the jury was entering the courtroom each day, they saw the lawyers, the same lady lawyer, her name's Hilary Dudding, and they saw her and the guy who owns the law firm that she works for, Daniel Brown, whispering and laughing at them. So the jury's entering the room and they see these defense lawyers whispering and laughing at them, or they perceive that they're whispering and laughing at them. This juror felt like they were mocking their appearance and described it as unprofessional and unacceptable behavior to the judge. Now, the judge asked these lawyers what happened. The lawyers said it was a misunderstanding and apologized. But then the other 4 defense teams jumped up and took the opportunity to push for another mistrial, or this time a judge-alone trial. So for the same reasons, you know, obviously the jury does not like the defense either, and it's going to taint, you know, the ability to have a fair trial. So you've got to do something. Yeah,
you can't have that animosity between the jury and the lawyers. Yeah, no way.
Well, but also it's kind of infantilizing, right? To say, you know, the jury's not going to be able to get over this issue that they had with one of these defense lawyers.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you let it even become a thing at all, it's going to fester in the appeal.
That's true.
And if there's any evidence of it and it's on the record, it's, you know, there's your appeal.
So, yeah, well, exactly. So the Crown kind of urged the judge to proceed with the jury, right? But caution them appropriately about bias. But the judge decided not to do that. And also the Crown said, you know, if another jury was impaneled, EM would have to go through all that testimony and cross-examination for a second time, and nobody wanted to do that. So the judge is like, okay, we'll get rid of a second jury and we're going to go judge alone this time. So now, instead of being tried by a jury of their peers, they are relying on the general knowledge and experience of a judge, which, when it comes down to it, you know, they've had a lot of education and experience, but it does come down to their opinion on, they have to make judgment calls on things.
Yeah, exactly.
So now the trial is proceeding as judge alone. So the hockey players get a judge alone trial without actually having to opt for it. And I'm not saying there's no proof that this was an orchestrated series of events, but it certainly suggests that there was an effort to have a judge alone trial.
But would that benefit them though? Because it's a roll of the dice either way, whether the judge is going to see it the same way as a jury would, and it's a female judge, so I would think some people may see a female judge possibly more sympathetic to EM's situation. I feel like it's going to be a roll of the dice one way or another.
That is a very good point, but also this is on the heels of the Jacob Hogard trial, the first trial a couple of years ago, and where it was a jury and they found in favor of the victim complainant known as JB, who's the subject of Breaking Idol, the documentary on CBC that just came out. She was very emotional as she testified, and she cried a lot. She expressed her emotions. You saw her on the documentary. She's very expressive, and the jury found him guilty of sexually assaulting her. So what came of that is that a belief that the jury might be more easily swayed by the emotion of a sexual assault victim complainant testifying at trial. So in this case, where you've got all these hockey players and one victim complainant, if she's testifying and she's going through days and days and days of cross-examination, getting upset, the jury might not take this particularly well. And they had already gone through that, right? It was a brutal, exhausting process. So it serves them better to have a judge, because the judge will go over the emotion and just kind of is supposed to just hone in on the facts, whereas the jury takes all kinds of things into consideration. It's a completely different decision-making process in both cases, and the jury doesn't have to explain their workings or how they reach their decision. It just has to be unanimous, whereas the judge has to explain her workings. She has to show exactly how she arrived at that decision. And, she can do it without taking into account the emotions that might come out on the stand. It's really complicated.
Yeah, it does make sense. So I never thought of that aspect of it. A jury, you just need a group of people that all have the same gut instinct or the same feeling about what should happen. Where a judge, it's a different thing. They need to basically show their math at the end of it, or appeal time comes and they're in trouble then. But this does go to judge alone. Does she have to go through all the the questioning again, or is the judge able to use the evidence from the initial trial that started with a jury?
Yeah, so yes, of course. So because the judge was there throughout EM's testimony and her cross-examination, she got, you can get rid of the jury and now just go at judge alone, and EM doesn't have to testify again. But now there's no jury to gauge an emotional reaction to what she was saying on the stand. There's just a judge, and we don't know what the judge thinks about sexual assault. Whether she has any experience dealing with sexual assault, has any knowledge, has any kind of trauma-informed training. There is no mandatory training for judges to learn about how to be trauma-informed when it comes to these kind of unique crimes where the body is the crime scene and the victim complainant is just a crown witness. And unfortunately, in this situation, in my opinion, this judge was not well informed about the complexities of sexual assault and the steps that you take to get consent under Canadian law. So, yeah.
And even the nuances of when you come to the nuances of consent, it's not like that EM was like threatened with violence, like to stay and do this stuff. It was all this kind of like psychological explanations for why she was there and why she was taking part in it non-consensually. So I guess, it would be a lot to put on someone. Like, I see why these kinds of trials are so complicated and difficult. Like, on the surface, it could appear to be her word against theirs, but when you really boil it down, there's like behavioral science at play that the average person just, it's so far over our heads. Thankfully, we don't have to think about this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's all the same kind of thing, when the body's trauma response activates and floods you with those stress chemicals, like cortisone and adrenaline and stuff. it applies to so many different situations. And, people can do extraordinary things under traumatic circumstances just because that adrenaline gives them that burst of strength. And afterwards, they can't understand how they were doing that. Sexual assault victims saying, why did I freeze? Why did I not fight back? With EM, there's several different, trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, flop, disassociate, go floppy, fawn, which is try and appease, comply, be submissive. And none of these responses were an aspect of the trial. In fact, the word trauma only appears once in the entire 90-page written decision that the judge put out. And that one time is where she says that she basically says she's not going to consider the science of the neurobiology of trauma. She cites case law to explain why she's not going to take that into consideration. But I looked into the case law that she was citing, and I feel like she misrepresented it. And I'm saying I feel like because I'm not a lawyer, but I am analyzing this case as a member of the public through the open court system. So I feel that she misrepresented this law. And I don't know why you would want to actively dismiss well-established science that might explain why her memory was gappy, why she had inconsistencies and patches in her memory, Whereas when it came to the hockey players, they also had patchy memory. Their stories were all over the place. There were inconsistencies. Some players said they saw things that timestamps proved they couldn't have seen because it happened before they arrived.
Okay,
there's all kinds of things like this. And so, what I'm saying is both sides had inconsistencies and memory gaps in their testimonies and statements. But for some reason, when it came to the hockey players, the judge was really ready to say, well, you've had a concussion, so that affected your memory. Oh, you were clearly drunk and that has affected your memory. Now that you're testifying, it's, 7 years later and, that has affected your memory, the passage of time. So it's like the judge afforded so many different excuses and reasons to the hockey players for why their memories were not perfect. But when it came to EM, she dismissed the main scientific explanation that could have explained hers. So it was very frustrating to go through and realize exactly what happened here. And I don't know why the judge decided to choose this way. And a lot of people from my coverage incorrectly assume that I think those hockey players should have been found guilty. And I don't. That's not the issue. I feel like the hockey players, there's no evidence that they actually really understood what consent really was, and thought from her behavior that they had consent. And the fact that Michael McLeod took those consent videos kind of illustrates how rudimentary their understanding of consent actually was, and how they didn't care about her well-being. They only cared about what they could get and what they could take from her. And as long as she wasn't fighting back or protesting, then it was okay to proceed. And if the judge agreed, if the judge kind of went in the direction that I would have, they would have found, and I've learnt the legal language since I did that series. So the judge could have found that EM was credible because, of the trauma and the brain and all the rest of it, and that she was not consenting to the sexual activity. But the judge could also have found that those hockey players had an honest but mistaken belief that EM was consenting. And that way, the judge would have found them not guilty without completely eviscerating EM and creating all these headlines about don't believe the victim, and that, EM is neither credible nor reliable. I have found actual consent. All these, the judge's written decision was just littered with these awful derogatory comments about EM that were just completely unnecessary, and she didn't have to do that. And if the judge had have gone with the route that I arrived at, and that a number of law professors and law experts have also said, that the hockey players had an honest but mistaken belief that EM was consenting, even though she was not. Justice Carassia could have explored the men's actions more. So she could have explored why they thought that she had consent, what the red flags were that she wasn't consenting, she was awkward, stiff, she was crying. It's just crazy. And she could have chosen to kind of use this moment to educate Canada about the mechanisms of consent and how to check and that type of thing. This is a judge's role. They influence how society thinks about things. And her written decision was full of harsh and disparaging comments about EM that ended up leading the news cycle. And it justified the harsh comments that had already been made by hockey supporters and men's rights advocates towards EM. And they're now citing the judge's own words to slut shame her and promote the idea that what happened in that hotel room was essentially and I've seen this on Reddit, a consensual gangbang.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And so the judge found that all the evidence shows that she gave them consent. I guess if you follow that math, the judge is accusing her of basically giving consent and then going after them after the fact. Yeah. So by the judge dismissing the science of trauma and what the body actually does to help us deal with traumatic situations, she basically said, well, EM, you were just full of shit. You told so many lies. You can't get your story straight. And it's clear that you were there for a wild night with these hockey players and that you wanted to perform all these sexual acts on them. That's basically what it is. And also, what would she have to gain? If that was what was happening, what would EM have to gain by going through all the trial and that stuff? Because she's already got a financial settlement. Right. So her further, destroying the careers and reputations of these players would give her nothing. Exactly. She's got nothing to gain from this. And a lot of people, have said, EM never wanted to go to trial and, she was forced to do it and blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, she chose to go to trial and she said, she wanted people to know what happened. And I think she's performed a public service by exposing things that most people might not have any knowledge of. I did not have any knowledge of the trauma response of flopping or fawning. I only knew about fight and flight. And then when I covered the Jacob Hogard trial, I learned about freeze. And then I realized that has happened to me before, not in a sexual assault, but in another kind of traumatic situation, a car accident. And I explained that on my series, how I froze instead of helping people out of this car that had turned over. It's strange how the body reacts, Mm-hmm. And so, yeah.
The 5 men in Canada's 2018 World Junior Hockey Team were acquitted of sexual assault Thursday. They were accused of engaging in non-consensual group sex with a woman identified in the court as EM. After 8 weeks of testimony, the judge did not find EM to be credible or reliable.
The lack of understanding of trauma responses, I think, in the courtroom has been really, really clear. So we also want to make clear to survivors beyond EM that we believe them.
Protesters voicing support for the complainant in the case gathered regularly outside court. They hoped for a different outcome. This one, they say, is a setback and will have an impact on survivors of sexual violence. Advocates say there are barriers for those who choose to report sexual assault to police, and further challenges should those cases make it to the criminal justice process.
The justice system isn't set up for them to receive justice. It isn't set up for them to be believed and to be heard, right? And so what we want survivors to hear, what we want community to know is that there are people that believe them.
So, but what comes of it now? So these players are hockey stars. They take some time off as the trial all happens. Eventually, they're found not guilty. The publication ban allows EM to fade out of the public eye. But what happens with these players? Are they, like, where are they now? Did their career just go back to normal?
Well, so, like, the NHL issued a statement saying regardless of the verdict, this behavior that the hockey players admitted to, and, you know, whether or not it was consensual or not, they confirmed all of this, you know, that these sexual acts happen and that type of thing. And the NHL said that this situation was unacceptable and disturbing regardless of verdicts. But it reserved its decision about whether they'd be allowed back in the NHL until after the verdict. And then it did decide to allow them back in. And after that, it was basically a wait and see which teams would have them, if any of them were kind of deemed worthy, because they've had a break from hockey now, right?
That's true too. They've had some time off, but it's like with hockey, so much of the money moving around is based on advertising and sponsorship.
Yeah.
So these people, like, they're, no matter what the outcome is, they're tainted in terms of public relations, of course.
Yeah, exactly. There's always going to be a stain on them now because, you know, it might be easy for diehard hockey fans to say, oh, they were found not guilty at trial. But people who read the news articles and look into it and have an open mind and a curiosity and aren't stuck in their ways can really see, like, that there was a bit of a miscarriage of justice with this trial and something went wrong here that just was not good for society. So, you know, they legally and they might be cleared to go back in, but the only one who has actually two of them now have been accepted back. One of them is, so the main one is Carter Hart. I personally think that he is the number 2 public enemy after Michael McLeod in terms of what went on in that hotel room. Because while Michael McLeod was filming one of those consent videos, you can hear Carter Hart in the background saying, I'll get fabs. And then he sent a message to another player who was not in the hotel room to say, hey, get to this room. So he actually invited someone as well. Luckily for that guy, he didn't show up. Carter Hart is apparently a really amazing goal tender, and so much so his parents paid for all this sports psychology consultations when he was a teenager to get in, because apparently being a goalie is like a really cerebral thing. You know, you've got to like predict where the puck's got to go and stuff. I don't know. So anyway, his parents paid a lot of money for this, and apparently that's why he's a really good goalie. So he's been the main one that people wanted, and the Vegas Golden Knights ended up signing him on, and a whole pile of, it's caused a little bit of a kind of rift. A bunch of fans, women especially, are upset that, you know, the Vegas Golden Knights and the NHL, so they have these kind of ethics policies and that type of thing. And the behavior that Carter Hart admitted to when he testified, he's the only one who testified, goes against that. And he's never taken any kind of accountability. He's never said what I participated in was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, or it might not have been criminally wrong, but it was morally wrong.
It's kind of there's just a bit of an irony there, I guess, that it's a team in Vegas that takes them on, just like of everywhere.
I know.
It's in Vegas.
Well, we haven't even spoken about Brett Howden, you know, the poor, sad witness who was in the room, but he also plays with the Vegas Golden Knights. When he got to testify, he was so conflicted, you know. It's clear he felt like loyalty to his team, and so when he was asked questions, he would be like, I can't remember, and then, I've had a concussion, and you know, it's just a whole thing. So yeah, he's on the Vegas Golden Knights. So Carter Hart has gone there to be with Brett Howden, and so it's like no matter what happens, they'll always have a stain on their reputation. But at the end of the day, Carter Hart just signed a deal for 2 years and $4 million. So
Oh, wow.
I'm sure it's not as much as he might have got had he not been charged with sexual assault, but still, that's a chunk of change.
Absolutely. Now, we've had about a 1 hour long telling of this story. You've done something much deeper and more involved on Canadian true crime. So for people who want to know the full story with so much more detail about the allegations, the trials, and every other aspect of this, tell us like a little bit about your series and how we listen to it.
Yeah, so I spent 2 months going through the judge's written decision. I never planned to do it. I just kind of started looking at a few things. I was going to cover it from a...
That's by the way, that should be your middle name.
know.
Like Kristi, I never planned to go to this deep, but then I found these judges' decisions.
Well, they call it a passion project for a reason, right? And I allow myself that space to follow my passion. So it's like one thing led to another, and before you know it, I'm going through that written decision line by line and comparing it to all the evidence presented at trial, what's the news archives, the various studies and statistics about trauma and trauma responses and that type of thing. So I really dug in deep, and it ended up being an extremely detailed series. But like the judge, I wanted to show my working. I didn't just want to come up with my conclusions. I wanted to explain exactly here's where I think it was unfair and that type of thing. So it ended up being extremely comprehensive and in depth, probably too much for the casual kind of listener. So I'm glad that you've invited me on to talk about it. It's been hard. My script, like I said, was 100 pages long. So condensing it into a kind of an hour-long episode like this is difficult.
Yeah, but I think that's the way to do it, because now it's like someone who's heard this much has the foundation for the beginning, middle, and end, and the elements that are at play. For the people who want to go much deeper, Canadian True Crime Podcast's 5-part series it's basically like what you've done and what you often do is it's an audiobook that you wrote and researched. And it's like I feel like to call what you do a podcast almost like belittles it.
Well, that one actually, it takes a strange format, because the first episode, and this is what the series was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be a series. It was me talking with 2 sexual assault survivors, and one of them is Kelly Favreau from BC, and the other one is JB from the Jacob Hogard trial. And so they kind of told me their perspectives about the Hockey Canada trial and what they saw happening. And it was just supposed to be me letting them have, tell people what it's like as someone who has testified at a trial, especially with JB, the high profile trial, what their experience is like. And, before you know it, I'm going into the whole thing. So the first episode is me in conversation with the 2 survivors. And then after that, it's me getting into the weeds. And it ruined my summer, Jordan. It really did. I started doing it just before the summer, and then my whole summer was spent on the Hockey Canada trial.
Yeah, I will say I've known you for probably going on 7 or 8 years, and I think every summer and Christmas and spring and fall, you find yourself getting too deep into a story, and it eats you up. But what ends up coming out is these thorough, comprehensive, empathetic, and grounded tellings of the stories. One of which is, now you mentioned it already here, is a documentary by CBC about I just call it the Headley trial, but it's the lead singer of Headley.
Jacob Hogard,
Jacob Hogard, you've formed a friendship with the victim in that case. And I say together, you told the story in a CBC documentary. So it just shows like the power of what you do.
Yeah. Well, like I didn't expect her to reach out to me from behind a publication ban, but she happened to be a listener of the podcast. And when she saw that I was covering her trial, she immediately reached out to me. And then, she was with me as I was doing the rest of those episodes, the trial of Headley's Jacob Hogard, that's the series. And we stayed in contact ever since. And the documentary Breaking Idol, you can watch it on YouTube or it's on CBC Gem. It kind of captures the first time that we met in person. She caught the train to Toronto, and we did a kind of podcast recording with the film crew there. So It was very meaningful experience for both of us, and I know for Jess, it's a huge deal, right? Because this is the time that she came. Jessica Baker, her name is JB.
Okay, I was about to stop you because I didn't know if it was still a band.
Her ban just got lifted for this documentary. Okay. So it's a big thing, being in a first documentary for her and everyone knowing who she is, you know, after, because she was getting it from all the Headley fans as well. And it's brutal, it really is.
I want to thank you for joining me here on the Canadian Gothic. This topic, of course, is quite heavy, but it's very important. The elements of this story raise a lot of questions that many of us have differing opinions on. But I suppose simply considering those questions will help society better understand consent. For anyone out there who wants to further explore this story, I recommend you check out the multi-part series on Canadian true crime that covers this case. Left to her own devices, Kristi dives much deeper into the weeds than we had time to get into today. But that said, Kristi did an amazing job of boiling it down for us here. And I want to thank her so much for sharing her time and her knowledge of the case with us. And with that said, I'm going to start wrapping this episode up. But before I do, I have a few more thanks to serve up. I want to thank Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides our intro and outro voiceovers, as well as Monty Datta, who provides the music for this show. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening, as without your interest and your support, the Canadian Gothic would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to our premium feed. Adam, Carly, and Claire, thank you for going premium. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money will fund the creation of new episodes of the show, but it'll also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at thecanadiangothic.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know you listen. Your support is very much appreciated. Now until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, let me know if you see anything weird.
Thank you for listening to Canadian Gothic.